Drone technology has been in existence for over 100 years and has been gradually evolving ever since. The drone's ancestry can be traced to as far back as 1897, when the inventor Nikola Tesla demonstrated a remote-controlled electric boat to the U.S. Navy. But the Navy dismissed his idea as being impractical and unnecessary. The military application of the principle of remote-controlled vehicles first emerged in the form of unmanned aircraft during World War I, pioneered by the British scientist Archibald Lowe, and was further developed during the 1920s. Armed with explosives and guided from the ground by radio waves, these expendable weapons were designed essentially as missiles, culminating in the cruise missiles of today. The first non-expendable drones to take to the air were developed during World War II to tow targets for gunnery practice, although targets were also towed by manned aircraft whose pilots were understandably nervous about the accuracy of the gunners. So what was ultimately to become a bird of prey originated as a kind of clay pigeon. Later, during the period known as the Cold War, more sophisticated drones began to emerge, now equipped with cameras. Driving this development was the increasing vulnerability of reconnaissance aircraft to ground fire, the loss of pilots, and embarrassing incidents such as the U-2 crash in 1962, when a secret U.S. spy plane was shot down over the USSR.
As the summit conference draws near, the Supreme Soviet in Moscow hears Premier Khrushchev announce that an American plane was shot down over Soviet territory. He accuses the U.S. of trying to wreck the summit conference before it begins. Khrushchev's angry speech stirs speculation about the Russians' own motives, but it also leads to an admission that the U.S. has been conducting reconnaissance flights high over the Soviet Union by U-2 planes like this one. It is a civilian-piloted, unarmed research plane carrying special photographic equipment. In Washington, the State Department says intelligence flights are necessary for the security of the United States.
The U.S. had put aside some money in a program called Big Safari. This money was to be allocated towards special reconnaissance programs. So in 1962, enter Ryan, a small company in San Diego, right by Lindbergh Field, whose major product line was an unmanned target drone called the Firebee. In 1965, we were worried about what was happening in China. And this is what eventually brought me to work in San Diego. The U.S. wanted to overfly Red China at very high altitudes, altitudes of 70,000 feet or above. They needed a new aircraft, one that was stealth, one that had radar-absorbing material, one that had an engine capable of flying at subsonic speeds at very high altitudes.
Although these reconnaissance drones were successful, they were quite expensive to operate because they required other aircraft, flight crews, and complex recovery operations, and the Air Force began to consider other options for the mission.
So Ryan was given a contract to build an airplane called Compass Arrow. 28 of these airplanes were built, none went into service. My belief is that the SR-71 was also coming into operational status, and the Air Force was given a choice. Do you want to have an unmanned aircraft or a manned aircraft to do these missions? The Air Force elected to go with the SR-71. That's kind of speculation on my part, but I think the timing is about right.
John, we're stabilizing at Mach 3. I'm showing 81,400 altitude.
The first known attempt to put a missile on a drone started with a program called Have Lemon. It began in 1971. A number of Firebees were equipped with pylons and a forward-looking TV camera in the nose. The UAV stands for Unmanned Aerial Vehicle. RPV is another acronym, Remotely Piloted Vehicle. Drones are what they're called today. These drones were called BQM-34As, and starting in late 1971, they performed remote-controlled strikes on simulated air defense sites. They used Maverick TV-guided missiles and the Hobo, which was called the GBU-15. It was a smart bomb with controllable fins that went after the targets. The very first launch of a missile on a drone was on 14 of December 1971, and that was a Maverick missile. And the way that worked, just to go into it for a second, was the drone had a TV camera in the nose. A pilot flying in a C-130 would look at what the drone was looking at. And let's say he saw a cloud of dust coming up from a roadway. He would steer the drone to get closer to the cloud of dust. Let's say the drone identified the cloud as coming from a tank. Bad guys were in the tank, or a Jeep, or some other vehicle. He would then switch the TV over to the Maverick missile. The Maverick also had a TV seeker. And now you're looking, the pilot was looking at what the Maverick missile was looking at. At some distance from the target, a light would go on on the pilot's console, indicating the missile was within target range of the target. He would then launch the missile, which would then steer towards the target, destroying it. The results were acceptable, but politically, the culture in the Air Force didn't want to accept the use of an unmanned aircraft to wipe out a target, and so monies were withheld and the program was terminated.
Nevertheless, funding for drone development continued during the 1970s.
Ryan continued the flight test program, demonstrated the feasibility of 24 hours above 55,000 feet. We also put a payload in the nose. It was a U-2 payload. We flew that off Cape Canaveral, Florida, gathering information, proving the airplane could get out of the way of manned aircraft on the corridor from New York to Miami. We were controlled by FAA out of Atlanta, and the tests were successful. Unfortunately, the production contract was awarded to Boeing, unfortunately for Ryan, and unfortunately for me, since I worked at Ryan. We then protested the award. The Air Force decided in Boeing's favor. However, the program was canceled, and the Air Force drone program office at Wright Field was suspended. So that left a gap from 1975 until a few years ago when drones were rediscovered. Of all people, General Atomics in San Diego.
In 1986, General Atomics was acquired by Neil and Lyndon Blue, who took the company private. While they were in college, Neil and Lyndon Blue actually flew a small aircraft over the Andes into Central and South America, and that expedition was early, ahead of its time, and it was written up in Life magazine. In fact, they were on the cover of Life, and they subsequently developed several businesses, including plantations in South America, but much more recently, they've been involved in natural gas distribution utilities and other areas of energy when they had an opportunity to acquire General Atomics. And at that very same time, General Atomics' new defense division began a project to develop an unmanned aircraft system. Our position in this new field took a real big step forward in 1991 when the company acquired the assets of another firm called Leading Systems Incorporated of Irvine, California. They had developed the NAT 750, that's gnat, like in the little insect. That was a small unmanned aircraft under a government program. Then, in 1994, the Naval Air Systems Command, that's the Naval Air Systems Command, awarded General Atomics a contract for 10 tactical endurance unmanned aircraft that would meet the Navy's need for a system that could carry 45 pounds of payload to an altitude of 25,000 feet. General Atomics was tasked to deliver a scaled-up version of the earlier Nat 750 that would be ready to deploy within 12 months. And that plane was the Predator.
The Predator was invented in San Diego. I mean, and the Predator has led the way for all of the other UAVs to come behind it. And they actually are keeping their technological edge. The Reaper, I believe, can carry more ordnance than an F-15, and they actually have a Predator C, which has HD video and does a lot more stuff than even the Reaper does. So what you're looking at is a fantastic company, a patriotic company. I know the owners; they love America. Lyndon Blue, who's one of the CEOs of the company, is a former Air Force pilot, and they just have great people. It's a type of they are the type of jobs you want in your district, and it's a type of manufacturing that you want in this country, and they're relatively cheap for the bang that they provide for the buck. That makes sense. Still a whole lot cheaper to fly a Reaper than an F-15 with a manned F-15.
If you talk to them, they try to mask off the fact that this company and this congressman are very, very friendly with each other. Lyndon Blue, in fact, was his campaign finance chairperson in 2008. And so what he did was he basically, when you're the candidate running against somebody like this, you're not running against Duncan Hunter. You're running against Lyndon Blue and General Atomics. That's your adversary, because Lyndon Blue can go out to all of his friends, get all the money in a big pile and pass, and then once he amasses a couple $1 million, he sends it to all of the other candidates. Doesn't spend it on this campaign, doesn't spend any money here at all. I think $16,000 all they spent on this campaign. The other, I think $3.5 million went to all of the other candidates across the country in close races. Thus, those right-leaning candidates that were all saying, I want to expand the military budget, I want to make it, I want to make us more safe, and so forth, put those people in so that his contracts will be renewed in years to come.
The amount of government money funneled to General Atomics is truly staggering. $5.3 billion over the next 10 years. It amounts to over $100,000 per capita for the population of Poway, California, where about 4,000 people are employed at the General Atomics facility. Similar funding goes to Northrop Grumman, Raytheon, and other contractors working on drone technology in Virginia and throughout the country.
We are in a situation now where these workers, and I've talked to them that work at General Atomics, they say, well, you know, I kind of don't like what I'm working on because I don't really like warfare. Some of these people are progressive and liberal, you know, people that really don't like warfare, but they say, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking I'd like to have that war way over there keep going for almost forever to keep my job security going.
So setting up Sentinel Piece here for exhibition, we were able to find a Predator drone coffin, unmanned aerial vehicle container that shipped for $17,647 by way of the U.S. taxpayer. We were able to acquire it on Craigslist for $300. And there's a surplus bulk. I think there were 9 of them originally in the area, and a gentleman we found, Dave and Beak, him and his dog out in Ramona, happened to have 2 of them, and just were trying to get rid of them. So we figured we needed to find a way to take it as a ready-made object and insert it back into the landscape, or to figure out a way to you know, have some dialogue about accountability for the industries that we produce here locally, or the ones that we're a part of.
Having acquired this on Craigslist, we were kind of struck by everything that's implied within it in terms of it being sort of linked to this region specifically. And we were trying to think of some way to amplify that. And I think by batting around ideas, we eventually arrived at sort of one, modifying it as a kind of quasi-livable unit. And then secondly, to sort of take it out as a sort of sentinel with which to visualize the military-industrial complex landscape in San Diego. Something that is otherwise doesn't call a lot of spectacular attention to itself, even though it's you know, even though it's such a significant economic driver in the region. So, as part of the performance, or part of sort of taking it around the region in order to sort of visualize it in that landscape, or so that we could use it kind of as a prism through which to kind of parse what's behind it, we took it to General Atomics Aeronautical in Poway, where the Predator drones are developed and manufactured, and kind of set up outside of there, similar to the setup that you see here, and just sort of hung out for 45 minutes to an hour or so. When we had sufficiently documented everything, we began sort of manhandling it back into the U-Haul truck, and at that point an employee of General Atomics saw us doing this kind of out of context of the original performance, and so he became alarmed and alerted the authorities that a Predator drone was being stolen.
What we did was we did some modest modifications to the project to convert it into a 2-bedroom camper that can be pushed around the town. But we used it as a tour of photo pilgrimage that happened through the last 2 weeks, running about in various military industrial complex sites, NASCO shipyard, SAIC, General Atomics, and Poway Aerospace Division.
Art's better at evoking than educating, and you know, I think the artist should make people see things in a different way. They don't need to sort of explain everything to people, but you know, evocation rather than education is art's purpose, and it's the beginning of understanding. It's not the end of it.
Several miles down the road, we got swarmed by police cruisers, and at that point I had sort of thought, oh, this is where we learned that it's illegal for this thing to be hanging 7 feet out the back of a U-Haul trailer. But then when I saw the cop get out with a shotgun in my rearview mirror, I was thinking that things were a little bit more serious. So myself and the passenger, Keith Muller, were apprehended. We were, you know, face down on the asphalt in traffic with shotguns pointed at us, and we were sequestered in separate police cruisers while the sheriffs went around and assessed the situation. And after about 45 minutes of corroborating stories, they were able to sort of conclude that we were within our legal rights to own this thing, and that it was really nothing more than a glorified ammo case. So they let us go right there.
So, I mean, I think the project for everybody is trying to be a greater performance and then see how we can convert it into design studio pedagogy, where we can begin to talk about industry ethics locally, or we can start raising some of these questions as to how does the industry butter its bread, what are the strong ties to the history of the suburbanization of warfare as it has inherently occurred in Southern California, most notably San Diego, with the second largest naval installation, and I believe $250 billion annually consumed by the top 9 private defense contractors in the region. So we want to bring accountability to that. We want to talk. We want to, find ways that are functioning and soft in dissent, that are not easily dismissive.
So there was a handful of fascinating things on the box itself when we acquired it. If you read this shipping label closely, there's a sort of a return address to Creech Support Center, which is the Air Force base that they pilot these things from, about 45 minutes northwest of Las Vegas. And then the address to Operation Enduring Freedom, Kandahar, Afghanistan, which sort of locates this piece of hardware in contemporary history, I think. And then we made some additions to it, including sort of the World War II style nose art, where there was usually kind of a central cartoon character or a pinup girl. Usually the cartoon character was riding a bomb. And then usually on the World War II bombers, they'd have swastikas or something to designate the amount of Nazi targets hit or something like that. So in keeping with the with tourism in the military in San Diego, our mascot is Shamu, who's sort of piloting a drone remotely. He's kind of in the vein of an angry bomber pilot with the cigar and everything and the anchor tattoo. And I guess the slogan comes from a postcard I have on my refrigerator of Shamu, and it says "San Diego is killer." So yeah, and then the little Shamus as sort of the hit markers. But then we also have the kind of NASCAR defense contractor logos. So even though this box is specifically for General Atomics developed thing, we've got SPA-WAR and Boeing and Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics, SAIC, General Atomics, and all of those came from a list of the top 10 largest military contracts with the Department of Defense, and I think 8 of which have significant presence in San Diego.
So what we have then are these operations going on that persist because these companies want to continue making money from the government. General Atomics is not a free market company. It is not a capitalistic company. It is completely a creature of the taxpayer, gets all of its money from the government. It is essentially an expansion of the government into this sort of private enterprise, allowing these people to become multi-billionaires by sucking money from the taxpayer and putting it into this big pile over here. And what are they doing? They're making all kinds of, sometimes going on forever. In fact, I talked to somebody who used to work at General Atomics before it was bought by, I believe it was before it was bought by the Blue Brothers. And here was a guy working on a fusion reactor. They were trying, it was this gigantic reactor that they have up there and near La Jolla. And he said, you know, they just kind of want to keep trying things and keep their jobs and keep this thing going. You know, they never really want to try anything in this big reactor because it just takes so much money to get it started. But, you know, the people there, I'll be working on this for the rest of my life. You know, it's such a big problem.
So there's also there's a danger lurking in there, which is actually oddly attractive. So in a sense, the power of something to capture the imaginary, the imagination, it's usually a combination of things like that. It's not always that something is so lovely. You know, it's that kind of odd, you know, combination of something which is actually could be really cute, but also quite lethal. Something which is quite extraordinary and captivating, but also really disturbing. So I think drones do that, and so that kind of they set into place this really that's they become this kind of odd, unsettling object of fascination.
A lot of people think it's the ultimate in a weapon that doesn't require any of our knowledge. It's very cheap, cheap way to fight a war, no casualties on the American side, perfect weapon, spy in the sky. They believe Syriana, the movie, and that this is the ultimate weapon for the Pentagon. It's all nonsense.
So there's a fascination, or some sort of a fascination of human beings, and this is what maybe keeps us in these wars. There's a fascination of hunting, of get the other guy. That is maybe something inherent in the human construct. I don't know what's behind that or why we have to have these wars, but it'd be great if we could move away from war and move on to the things we need to solve.
Hey, get out of here.
That's the most persistent fly I've ever seen. Nice.
Now, where were we? That was pretty impressive, wasn't it? I got the second. What do you think, Gibbs?
That is very good. It's right there.
It's right there. You want to film that? There it is.